top down.
Mm-hmm.
That attorneys were being replaced, similar to what Anderson was claiming that they, she was complaining that they were doing wrong things and document destruction and whitewashing, and they were pushing her out the door with heavy-handed approaches. Remember, my assumption starts with these are mobsters. They're not lawyers. They're people who look like lawyers, but lawyers don't act like this. Obviously, they have ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And there are good lawyers. But what's taken over is more like a mob atmosphere within the legal community. And that extends all the way up to White House counsel. That extends all the way up to the regulators at the highest levels of our government who have failed us. And notice they're all coming from or going to law firms, a certain group of law firms.
Mm-hmm.
And so my assumption is it's a criminal RICO enterprise that has infiltrated all of the legal system, including all the way up at the U.S. federal level. Obviously, Anderson saying whitewashing was going on for U.S. attorneys brings it to the federal level, as well as the DA and ADA.
Mm-hmm.
So where you're in a state where your ADA and DA and U.S. attorney, similar to New York and Florida, I would assume, where I've run into the same exact pattern,
mm-hmm.
have been overtaken by criminals, you're back at asking the Gestapo for leniency at the camp.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to get it, meaning the head of this beast needs to be disassembled, and the way we do that is, lawyers are no longer above the law. All these regulators who lowered the guard in Florida for Stanford or for other banking in New York should all be tried. They shouldn't be making money, and we certainly don't need them as bright people who ruin the system to attempt to fix the system, which makes no sense. And so, until we start grabbing these attorneys, judges, and prosecutors by the neck and hanging them like we used to do in the West
mm-hmm.
when they corrupted, and I'm all for a good lynching of them if they're found guilty of treason against the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I liken this all to treason against the country because they have defeated the game here.
Mm-hmm.
They've found a way to commit criminal acts of stealing and robbing from the people of everything, their homes, their 401ks, their bank accounts, and like I said, most of it comes back to a few Ivy League schools which have been pumping out a bunch of criminal lawyers. And those criminal lawyers have polluted, perverted pretty much everything, and to block complaints against themselves, they've taken over the disciplinary, the ethics committee. They're running whorehouses in the ethics committee. I mean, come on.
Mm-hmm.
It's so outrageous and so ridiculous and such a shame on all of them. They should be disgraced at that Supreme Court. They should hang themselves next.
And
for what they've done to the state and the people, and literally it's all by lowering the regulations and then saying, oh, the regulator fell asleep on the Greenberg truck. I mean, Greenberg was in there lowering the regulations so that they could do these banking deals that were illegal with Stanford, offshore.
And
they should all be charged with felony crimes, not sent to the state bar. You and Baby should be charged with crimes against humanity and not sent to the bar, but sent to a courtroom for federal criminal charges against them. Why being a lawyer gets you to the bar, and then the bar is your peers who are all guilty of the same crimes.
Well, that's the protection. That's the protectionism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what it allows them to do is the bars allow them to feather their caps with vindication letters against the victims on letterhead of the Florida bar.
Right.
And it's a joke.
Right.
It's just at random. I've got these Florida bar guys breaking. So, in fact, when I caught the Proskauer partner Matthew Triggs in conflict violating his public office position with the bar in a multitude of ways, a guy, Kenneth Marvin, and one of his cohorts, they tried to dismiss the complaint I filed against the guy, and they cited a law, not a law, a draft legislation that they had drafted just days earlier, trying to exculpate the guy from Proskauer from what he was caught doing, which was handling complaints while he was in a blackout period.
Okay.
And And so they sent that to me, and it's up on my website at iviewit.tv.
What is the web? I'm sorry. What's the what? Give me the website again.
They actually created a proposed draft legislation to exculpate him from the bar rule he had violated, and tried to dismiss his complaint by sending that to me and saying, "See, here it is, rule number blah." But there was no rule. It had never been enacted. It hadn't even been really run through the Florida Supreme Court yet.
And what do you do? I mean, now they send this to you. It's obviously it's protection for this attorney that they've drummed up, that they've created out of nowhere.
Right.
And when they do that, what do you do with that? Where do you go with that? How do you overcome that? If you go to the Supreme Court with it, what happens in the Supreme Court?
What, are you kidding? I'm suing every single one of those judges at the Supreme Court of Florida. I'm suing the State Bar of Florida. And I hope that they're all reporting a $12 trillion federal RICO and antitrust lawsuit to state regulators and insurance auditors. And everybody, they better be reporting that they're all sued as defendants in that. I mean, the Florida Bar hopefully isn't hiding a $12 trillion lawsuit from state regulators. I mean, I hope not.
Well, they're certainly hiding it from their own insurance company.
I hope not. I mean, that would be even more criminal. I mean, that's criminal.
Hello?
You're talking more insurance fraud and a whole,
Well, it's bigger than that. Yeah. What is your website?
That could really put the people of Florida in great peril from these crooks. That's if they're. I don't know how state regulators could be that asleep in the state of Florida.
Well,
but
they
I'm
are.
Sure, they're auditing, their books and in compliance are fulfilling all their legal and fiduciary responsibilities that I know they would.
Only when somebody reports a poor schnook that they want to make an example of do they do anything. But if their reporting is about anybody in power, they bury it, they tie it up. Even Rothstein, it's very interesting that Rothstein's case, which certainly is not as significant as Madoff, but it's still very significant, $1.2 billion in a Ponzi scheme. He's been sitting in jail. They're waiting to sentence him. And, of course, the Miami Herald, which is basically an ineffectual a newspaper from the standpoint of reporting anything of consequence, because they're also in bed with a lot of these law firms. It appears to be that way.
Well, the law firms are behind the media at this point too. They control a lot of the media.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're reporting that Rothstein, because he helped them arrest, or he assisted them in the capture of a mobster who was going to launder money for him. He wore a wire. And
which was his friend, yeah.
Yeah, and as a result of that, they're going to reduce his sentence. And, of course, you look at that, you go, well, probably Rothstein has been negotiating behind the closed doors and telling them, you better get me off, because if you don't give me what I'm asking for, I'm going to tell everything. And I'm sure that they're deathly afraid of that. And your website is, give me the website, please.
My website is www.
Right.
.iviewit, IVIEWIT.TV.
Okay.
And my email is iviewit@iviewit.tv.
Iviewit at
iviewit.tv.
Iviewit.tv. Okay. And what is going on? You have several things that you've raised here. What is the status of Anderson's whistleblowing? Is that going anywhere?
It is. It's hopefully going criminal, because she came out in a civil case. She won her First Amendment violation of free speech in regard to her whistleblower claims. Mm-hmm. New York, that's how it's ferreted in the courts, a whistleblower. And she lost her money damage claim against 3 of the individuals, but at the same moment, she filed a request for a completely new hearing based on the illegal representation of Andrew Cuomo of the state defendants, claiming that, of course, she had gone to him to investigate these people, and
Right.
instead he's representing them but doesn't bring in a third party to investigate them. What Mr. Cuomo is doing in New York is essentially obstructing justice by representing the guilty party she's accusing
Mm-hmm.
and failing his office duty to the people, his honest services, and more.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing the same thing in my case,
Mm-hmm.
representing all these state defendants instead of investigating them.
Mm-hmm.
And by not calling in a third party to represent, what's happened is he's blocked the entire prosecutorial agency that is supposed to investigate corruption of public officials. So now they've got that level steeped in blockage.
Okay.
And so, it's more and more frustrating as you go through this process to see that these guys have really positioned at all of the right stops to deregulate complaints against themselves and insulate them misusing the law. And I always put in my complaints to, the Florida bar and all these hokey judges and whatnot that, I remind them of the judge's trial of the Nuremberg trials where we tried and convicted to life and more many of the Nazi judges who made it okay to put people in a concentration camp, steal their things, and eventually have them, put their mothers in ovens and stuff.
Well, the interesting thing that was said back in 1949 when the Florida bar became integrated, there was an opinion by Justice Douglas. There was an opinion that came out in the Lathrop. I think it's Lathrop is the case, where he said that because of these integrated bars, we have to be cautious of what could be created as goose-stepping brigades, alluding to Nazism at that time. And, of course, also in the 1949 integration question, when it was raised in the Supreme Court, one of the dissenters talked about a police state that would evolve. And when you take all of the power that is inherent in the judiciary today because of judicial immunity, that judges can't be sued regardless of what their decisions are in cases.
Well, that's only civilly. Don't let
Yes.
them confuse you. They try to say, it's for criminal, but nobody's above the law in the criminal, and so it's a civil issue. They're trying to claim their immunity, and they're trying to extenuate it and make you think that it extends to criminal acts, but it doesn't. If they act outside the scope criminally, they're as culpable and chargeable as anybody else.
Yeah, but you know what? The only time that I don't know how many complaints there are, but there's probably, tens of thousands of complaints against judges, federal judges who are, appointed for life, and yet there's maybe 2 impeachments in the whole process that have ever come down. But those only occur when the acts are so clear and where they've raped a child in their chambers or something, But other than that,
Get off that too.
Yeah, not all the time, but that's those are pretty clear. So they get into trouble with that. But other things that are more complex, it's almost like everybody becomes a total moron and can't figure out what's going on. And they take evidence that you provide to them and they turn it into something other than what you've given them. To make it fit the situation. So what you have is this almost like a powerful party, like the Communist Party is in other countries where they're the elite and everybody else is working for them.
Well, now you're getting to my real, conspiratorial side of what's happened, and I do believe our country is in the throes of a dictatorship. Sandra Day O'Connor left the bench in her first speech at Georgetown, said, "The country is in the throes of a dictatorship that is better to stop now than later." And I have followed that marching order ever since hearing those words, knowing that our country, the whole country, is in peril of a tyrannous group of treasonous lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And